I'm David Drumm. I'm one of the licensed Unity teachers serving this congregation. This morning we will be continuing the series on women of the Bible. And thanks to the generous contributions of this congregation, we'll be using some of the latest technology to make this possible. James has been utilizing this time machine technology to bring us Sarah and other women of the Bible. And James is in Hawaii this morning. I understand he'll be watching. I'm not sure if it'll be live because of the time difference, but hi, James. Before he left, he gave me a quick lesson on how to use this, so hopefully I'll remember and this will work right, but bear with me if it doesn't. When we're dealing with the Bible, we all have our own personal story about the Bible that comes into play. And in my personal journey, this particular Bible means a lot to me. It was presented to me by my fourth grade Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Walker, and it's inscribed to me by the First Christian Church of Richardson, Texas, which is just 3 or 4 miles here up the road, on May 30, 1965. So we're coming near the anniversary of that. And Mrs. Walker was a lovely, sweet lady, taught me a lot, but my own understanding of the Bible has evolved quite a bit beyond what I learned from Mrs. Walker. So bless you, Mrs. Walker, for starting me on the journey that has led me to where I am. A lot of our traditions, we have these things in Dallas called Bible churches, and a lot of the tradition looks at the Bible as the inerrant Word of God speaking to us with one authoritative voice about what is true and how we should live our lives. And some of us have experienced that and may have a few scars and wounds as a result of that experience, because sometimes this book can be used to kind of beat us over the head about our own behavior and tell us what we should be doing. But there's another way of looking at this Bible. I think it's a mistake to throw this book out because there's a lot of wisdom here. Whatever our own experience may be less than beautiful with our past interpretations of this, I think we should continue to give this a chance. One of my heroes, Bishop John Shelby Spong, says that if you don't reject the Bible, you basically got a choice between taking the Bible literally or taking the Bible seriously. And so I try to take the Bible seriously. Let's unpack what that means. To me, there's at least 3 aspects of taking the Bible seriously. First of all, we have to appreciate the Bible in the cultural context and the historical context in which it arises. Which takes a certain amount of study so we can really appreciate, these people not just as people down the street in 21st century America, but, people experiencing a different culture at a different time in a different worldview. And that's the historical side. Secondly, there's the literary side of Bible interpretation. If you look at the Bible seriously at all, you will see that it doesn't speak with one authoritative voice. It brings us a lot of old stories that were passed around the campfire. Sometimes it brings us an editorial voice that is condescending and critical of those stories and really doesn't like them and is telling us what we should think about those stories. Learn to recognize that voice when you see it. And the Bible also brings us not one unified level of consciousness, but an array of depths of consciousness. It tells us a story of the evolution of consciousness, but a given passage of the Bible may not reflect the highest consciousness. And so we should not be ashamed of evaluating the level of consciousness at play in a particular story as opposed to just adopting it as our own. Thirdly, if we take the Bible seriously, we look at it in terms of what Charles Fillmore would have called metaphysical Bible interpretation. I prefer the word metaphorical Bible interpretation, which I think has a similar meaning. because that's really what you're doing, is you're looking at the stories and the characters in the Bible as metaphors for the understanding of your own consciousness and personality. And so when we take a metaphorical approach to the Bible, we are looking at each character as if they're an aspect of our own consciousness and personality, and looking at how that character shows up in our own psyche. And this is true regardless of the gender of the character. Charles Fillmore tells us, and our own insight will tell us, that we have elements of masculine and feminine energy within our psyche regardless of how we gender ourselves. And in metaphorical Bible interpretation, we tend to look at the male characters as representing the rational, hierarchical, powerful, dominant side of our personality. We look at the feminine characters as representing the receptive, loving, compassionate side of our personality. But we all have both of them within us. But in the context of historical development, at the time a lot of these Bible stories were developing, the culture was shifting to a patriarchal, masculine emphasis away from a balance due to some historical factors that I won't take time to roll out here. You can check out one of my classes for more of an in-depth review of that. And we've remained somewhat unbalanced, I think, in our Western culture in terms of overemphasizing perhaps some of these rational, dogmatic, masculine values, maybe not bringing to the forefront all of these feminine, nurturing values. And so this series is an attempt to look at that and to kind of confront our inner feminine qualities that we all have. And so I'm going to utilize James's time machine to assemble, if this works right, a panel of 4 women of the Bible that I think will have very insightful stories to bring to us. And there's one other piece of technology that James hasn't shared with you yet, but he's also been utilizing this universal translator. Because think about it, Sarah came in, she doesn't speak modern English, she speaks Hebrew, and yet James was able to have a conversation with her on this stage. And so if you've seen any Star Trek episode, you know about this universal translator. And we've also acquired this, and we will use this, we will turn this off when we're talking about the metaphorical interpretation or when we're talking about the future of these characters. If you've read any science fiction, you know about this thing called the grandfather paradox, right? If we tell somebody about their future, then it may change, and then that may change the future, and then that change. So we don't want to get into that. So remind me if I don't turn it off, but we can't let these characters we're summing up learn about their future, and they don't care about our interpretation of them. We'll keep that to ourselves. But I would like to invite up a very distinguished panel, if I can work these controls right. And so the first lady I'd like to invite up, I need to set the controls here for ancient Palestine. And let's see, I think I want about 1700 BCE. And I am looking for Rachel, wife of Jacob, daughter of Laban. Rachel, can we bring you in? Rachel, this is 21st century America. We are so glad to have you here. You're among friends. These people love you. They've read stories about you. If you'll just have a seat, we'll have you come up and tell your story here in a minute. I also want to invite up Rachel's sister, Leah, if I can bring her up. Leah, welcome.
So bright.
Yeah, well, you're among friends here. Just have a seat. We brought you in with your sister to learn a little bit more about your story. That thing makes your voice louder. If you hold it to your mouth, yeah, like that, yeah. I want to invite up Delilah, who was Samson's girlfriend. I need to go about 200 years forward for that. Let me see if I can get it in the right setting here. Delilah, can I bring you in? Welcome, Delilah.
Hello.
Welcome to 21st Century America. Have a seat here by these ladies. And then finally, to round out our panel, I kind of saved the most notorious for last. I'm going to go forward to about 750 BCE, and I'm going to see if I can summon Jezebel, wife of King Ahab. There's Jezebel. Jezebel, welcome. If you'll just have a seat there with these other ladies. Okay, so I want to start with Rachel and Leah because you came the furthest distance in time. And if I could just have you step up together, since you're part of some of the same stories, and talk about your experience. Rachel, you're the younger sister, but we're introduced in our narrative to you first because you meet Jacob. Where do you meet him at?
Oh, Jacob, love of my life. I was tending my sheep with the other shepherds, and I was walking towards the well, and there he was, the most gorgeous man I'd ever seen. Tall, dark, handsome, and strong. He was able to remove the stone from the well single-handedly. Normally it took all the other shepherds to do that, but my Jacob, he could do it all by himself. Love at first sight. He looked at me, I looked at him, he kissed me. He looked up to the heavens and sang, and then wept. I love him. I'm the favorite sister. I was set to marry him,
And
not her.
And you're pretty proud of that. You're pretty proud of that, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay.
But if you remember, I'm the first wife.
Yes, and how did that happen? If he fell in love with you first, how did your sister come to be? How did you come to be the first wife,
Well,
Leah?
in our culture, the older sister gets married first, and you knew that.
But I'm in love with him.
But that's our
But he's
culture.
my man.
And so our dad had a plan. He said, I need to get you married off. You're not the attractive one. She's the attractive one. So I have a plan, and the plan is we'll get him drunk. On the wedding night, you sneak in.
He covered her with a veil, and Jacob, in his drunken stupor, didn't know. And my dad led them into the wedding tent, and he made love to my sister and didn't realize till the next morning that it was my sister.
He was disappointed, and I was hoping it would be wonderful, but he was so drunk that
So then he
it
was
wasn't so wonderful.
he was stuck with Leah. So that Jacob is one tricky guy, I tell you. But you got to be a wife too. So how did that happen?
Well, yes, after 7 years, when we met and we were supposed to get married, my father said he could marry me if he worked for him for 7 years. And Jacob worked it for him for 7 years. And he switched Leah for me. And then he said, okay, you can work for me for another 7 years and you can have who you really want, moi, Rachel, in exchange. And so I became his second wife, but I'm the favorite one. He loves me.
Yeah, and obviously very proud about it. But
Yes,
tell me.
she is.
Have you seen Jacob?
But tell me about children. I know they're very important in your culture because they're the soldiers, the farmers, and all that. So how many children did you have, Leah?
Oh, I had 6 sons and 1 daughter. And then my handmaiden had 1 or 2, I'm trying to remember. But anyway, yes, I gave him children, that's for sure. And in our culture, women, that was their job. Do women still do that today?
Well, sometimes, but that's a long story. We'll talk about that over coffee.
So God blessed her with all the children, but he was my love. God closed my womb, and I looked to God and said, God, give me children or I'll die. And God, I guess, never granted my wish until after she had had 4 or 5 children, and then I became pregnant.
But you had the love of your life. Jacob slept with me, but he was not in love with me. And I led this, my name, Leah, means weary. I'm described as the one with the sad eyes, the weak eyes, because I didn't have love. I didn't have love, and I was unwanted. I always felt unwanted and unloved.
Okay. And there we have the story about the mandrakes. So I guess it was your son Reuben that found the mandrakes, and then
And
what
she
happened?
noticed.
And I noticed and I thought, that is what is making her fertile myrtle over here. The mandrakes are making her have all these children. And I said, give me those mandrakes. It's my turn to have Jacob's heirs. And what happened was he gave them to me, and then I let Leah have her way with my man that night in exchange. I got the mandrakes so that I could have his children, but she was able to make love to Jacob.
That's an interesting deal.
We're sisters and we're sister wives.
Okay, and then Jacob had come to your home place, but then at some point he decided to go back to Canaan and just sort of drug you along. And we have a story, Rachel, there was something you just couldn't leave behind, and what was that?
I couldn't leave the teraphim, the gods that my father had. I wanted something from our home, but I also wanted the power. Jacob deserved the power. Jacob and I deserved the power.
Okay,
And we were both his wives, so we were both willing to go.
yeah.
And our father was a bit over the top.
Yeah.
So we were tired of his deals and
Yeah, I can see that.
his
I've read about
cunning
that.
ways.
Yeah, I can get that. Okay, so thank you for your stories, lady. And I'm going to use the. Yes. I'm going to turn off the universal translator here and talk about the metaphorical here a little bit. Let's talk about the historical also. Jacob changes his name to Israel, and his 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. And we have the Lia tribes. You heard she had 6 sons. And the Lia tribes include Judah, which is the tribe of King David, from which all the kings derived, and the tribe of Levi, from which the priests derived. So from a historical standpoint, the Jews would claim Leah as probably the more productive and valuable of the two. But Rachel did, after the Mandrake incident, manage to have Joseph and Benjamin, which were also 2 important tribes. Benjamin was the tribe of King Saul, also happened to be the tribe of Apostle Paul in the New Testament much later. And the tribe of Joseph were the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel that we'll hear about a little bit when we talk with Jezebel. So metaphorically, the one thing about metaphorical Bible interpretation is I don't think you should look at it like you go to Charles Fillmore's Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and sort of turn to it and look it down and that's the answer, because that's almost like accepting this book as authority. I think the point of metaphorical Bible interpretation is to use the inner guide, the inner wisdom, to see what rings true for you. And while I can't do that for all of you, I can offer my own metaphorical interpretation of Rachel and Leah. I would interpret Rachel as that part of all of us that wants to be approved by the outside, that wants to have outside validation and outside approval. It was more important to her to be Jacob's favorite than it was to be productive as a mother, until later, and then she made a little bit of a compromise with that. That's her learning experience, and learned to be fertile. Leah, on the other hand, I think represents that steady resolve and stick-to-itiveness that gets things done. Leah was not glamorous, not the favorite, but she just produced those children, which were very important in that. She just got the job done. And so I think Leah is that part of us that gets the job done. So now I'm going to turn back on the translator so I can have a conversation with Delilah. Delilah, if you will step up. Now, you kind of had a thing with Samson, right? You guys were an item?
Oh, yes, we were.
All right. Tell us about that.
So we met in the Valley of Sorek, and basically, he was so strong, big muscles, beautiful hair, great guy. And then when the Palestinians found out that we kind of had this little thing going, they were like, you know what, we're going to cut you a deal. And I was like, well, what's this deal? And they offered me tons of money. Lots, I don't know what it is in your guys' currency, but tons of money to basically find out the secret of his strength and give it to them.
Okay, so how did you find it out?
Well, first, I did it nicely. I just asked. I asked a couple times, and he led me through the ropes. He was like, okay, tie me down with some ropes. Tried that, didn't work. All right, try some leather straps. Tried that, didn't work. At this point, I'm getting a little frustrated. Then he told me to braid his hair, and then I knew, I was like, all right, this isn't gonna work. So then I started manipulating a little bit. I was like, oh, if you love me, you're gonna tell me what I wanna hear, and I wanna know the secret of your strength. And I did that over and over and over again, and then finally he told me that the secret of his strength is in his hair. So if I cut his hair off, his strength would go along with it.
Okay. All right. So I appreciate you being willing to be summoned back, but I understand you still haven't collected that large sum of money, which I guess, each of the 5 kings of the cities in Philistine owe you 1,100 shekels each. So, and I'm going to turn off the translator here because she can't know this, but she better collect fast because Samson's hair starts to grow back. He regains his strength. He pushes down the pillars of the temple and causes it to come crashing down on a bunch of Philistines. And so she better collect that money before that happens. So we thank you, Delilah, and we'll let you go back to your own time and place. Okay, now I'd like to invite up Jezebel for a conversation. Now, Jezebel, you are a real live princess. I'm not sure I've ever met a princess.
I am. I was born a Phoenician princess. My father was king, and I knew from the time I was born that I will very likely be married off to another country to maintain power and peace for my father.
Okay, and so which country were you lucky enough to be married off to?
Israel. Backwoods, unsophisticated. I brought culture and religion, the true religion of Baal, to these heathens in Israel.
Well, that's not the story we have. The Israelites are the chosen people of God.
They were poor, they were not sophisticated, their commerce was poor, they were backwoods, they were in need of sophistication. They also needed the protection of my father and his kingdom.
I am astonished. So what about your religion? Did you worship a god?
Baal, the only true God. The true God of fertility and prosperity, as evidenced by the sophistication of my country. So I brought Baal to Israel.
Okay, well, very tolerant of Ahab to let you continue to worship your native God, but why did you have to take it to the extreme of killing the priest of the Lord of Israel?
Because they crossed me. I am royalty. I am a queen. You don't cross the queen. So I brought my prophets to kill their prophets so that we would have parity of religion and peace.
Yeah, but didn't the prophet Elijah prove for once and for all that it's the God of the Israelites that has the power and not Baal?
Elijah was a thorn in my side. I was hard to get rid of him.
Yeah, and did you do that?
Eventually.
Yeah, okay. Well, I thought he went up in a whirlwind.
Well, he did.
Okay, all right. And then there's this little thing about that doesn't exactly put you in a good light in our eyes about this Naboth's vineyard that you wanted this vineyard real bad, and what did you do to get the vineyard?
Naboth was a fool. My husband became very depressed because he wanted Naboth's vineyard. And in my country, when a king wants something, he gets it. We even offered to pay Naboth for his land, but he refused it. He was a fool. So I had my prophets put together a story describing him as a blasphemer against the king. I had him taken out, stoned, and killed.
But that's bearing false witness. That violates one of the 10 Commandments.
I am a queen. My husband is a king. He deserves to get what he wants.
Ooh. Well, it's an interesting perspective. As we bring you in from your own time and place, I understand you've got an important meeting coming up with this guy named Jehu.
Jehu. Jehu killed my son, who was on the throne, and he expects to take over the throne. But he'll have another thing coming. He's coming to meet me, and I plan to seduce him.
Okay, well, let us know how that goes. And I need to be sure I've got the translator off here, but, for those of you that haven't looked it up, it doesn't exactly go that way on the meeting with Jehu. He kind of throws her out the window, and, the horses trample her, and then the dogs eat her, and there's just like a few parts left, and, it's kind of a gory story. We don't want to spoil it for her, but, so let me turn back on the translator. So I wish you the best of luck for that meeting, and I obviously can't tell you anything about the future, but I'll leave you with 2 parting tips. First of all, I wouldn't stand too close to the window. And secondly, dogs are not necessarily your best friend.
Dogs. No dogs. Are there dogs here? I don't like dogs. Get the dogs away. Are there dogs out here?
Right. All right. Good luck to you, Jezebel. Okay, just this week, we've been able to download this beta software upgrade to our time-traveling technology. So far, we've only been able to access the Hebrew Bible characters, before the Christian era. And if this works as advertised, this will enable us to tap into the New Testament characters. So hopefully it'll work as delivered. And if we're going to go into the New Testament, where better to start than Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? Because that's kind of the source of the whole thing. So I'm going to set for Palestine, specifically Galilee, in 4 years before the Christian era as we now measure it, and see if I can summon up Mary, mother of Jesus. Mary, can we? It works. Welcome, Mary. Have a seat here with these other ladies. And, well, actually come up and talk to me. So I am honored. I mean, you're kind of like a legend here in our time.
Really?
Yeah. So, the first story we have about you is you had this encounter with the Angel Gabriel. So what was that about?
That was crazy. So here this angel comes to me, and he tells me that I'm going to have a son. And I get really confused, because I'm like, well, it's no secret. I'm a virgin. Like, that should not be possible. But then he enlightens me with the fact that the Holy Spirit is going to create this baby in my body, and that it's going to be the Son of God. And that made a little bit more sense, but still a little confusing.
Okay, but you still had to deal with Joseph about this, right? I mean, he knows he's not the cause of this, and so how did that go?
My poor husband, yes. So I had to go tell him that I was going to have a baby, and it wasn't his, obviously, but it wasn't someone else's either. It was God's baby. And he loved me very dearly, and he trusted me very dearly, but there was still a part of him that had a lot of doubts until an angel, his intuition, some entity visited him in his sleep and said, no, you need to trust Mary. This is true.
Okay, Joseph was really quite a guy.
Very trusting.
There's these stories about when you were pregnant, about your cousin Elizabeth, like her baby jumps in the womb at your baby, and then you take Jesus for circumcision, and all these old people start going into songs and speeches and things. And so what was that like?
Fuss, yeah, for this baby. It was this huge big deal, which was a little intimidating. It was already kind of a weird, unheard of thing to have a baby of God, but then all these people were making such a fuss out of it. But as his mother, I was here to serve and here to care for him. So we went with it, and it turned out pretty well.
Now, I know a lot of mothers in our day and time who think that their son is God, but you may have a better claim than most.
Mine's actually God.
So the next thing we hear about Jesus, you and Joseph take the temple in Jerusalem for the festival, and he just leaves, and it takes you 3 days to find him, and he's hanging out with the priest, and so...
And he's not even sorry about it. He just disappeared for 3 days, didn't come back. No big deal. But yeah, stuff like that happened quite a bit, and I just had to accept the fact that he had a higher calling than I was aware of most of the time, and sometimes that meant not knowing where he was, but he really was the Son of God, and I was here to be his earthly mother.
Wow. So, speaking of being, unappreciative, I mean, there's several instances where he kind of disses you a little bit in public. So, I mean, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's tough. It really is, but I've come to an acceptance after a couple public remarks that anyone who follows God can be my mother. It's like, ouch, okay. But I was actually your mom. But I came to this understanding that my duty, my purpose was to be his earthly mother, and he had this bigger calling to the divine mother that could be in everyone.
Okay. Well, and sorry about the agonizing death that your son went through. We have the story of the cross, and then we have the story of Easter morning. It talks about a number of women going to the tomb, and sometimes the Bible's a little bit kind of vague. It talks about a bunch of Marys, and there was a Mary, the mother of James, and Jesus had a brother named James, but was that you? Were you at the tomb?
Yes, I do have a son named James, so that was me. And that was quite the experience to watch your son be killed on the cross for a good cause, but still such a terrifying thing. And then you go to this tomb and the stone's rolled away, and it's like, oh my gosh, where is he? He's not in there. And then all of a sudden it's a miracle as big as his birth was in the beginning, and he's back risen from the dead.
Wow. Would it surprise you if I were to tell you that in our time and age, many see you as the personification of the feminine nature of God, and that they even pray to you to intercede with God for their wishes?
Oh, wow. That's very humbling, but I would just put out there that anyone who chooses the path of divine motherhood, whether they are male or female, anyone that's choosing to nurture a child, inner or outer, in a higher consciousness is the divine feminine. So I appreciate the prayers to me, but you all have it within you as well.
Wow, very beautiful. Ladies, since you traveled such a long way, I invite you to stay with us for coffee and a pastry. I know your culture values hospitality. We'll get you back to your own time and place, but get a chance to meet some of these people that have heard so much about you. So just stick around. But I am going to turn off the universal translator and talk a little about the metaphysical. So Delilah, it seems to me, let's suppose that she loved Samson, and yet she betrayed him for money. And so I think metaphorically we have to recognize that as that aspect of us which would betray the power of love. And, maybe we find that within us, maybe we deal with it, but that's what I get metaphorically out of studying Delilah's story. As far as Jezebel goes, we have these things in Unity called 12 powers that represent aspects of our being that help us act in the world, and one of those powers is zeal. But it seems to me like Jezebel got a little bit of an overdose of zeal. That maybe anything can be carried to extremes, and that Jezebel is that part of us that is so zealous it will never compromise, it will never deal. It is just full thrust, head on, and we see where that got her, right? So maybe we should watch out for those Jezebel parts in ourselves. And so we appreciate having these ladies' stories. If you want to know more about the women in the Bible, James has been working off of this series of books by Liz Curtis Higgs. This particular one is the middle one called Slightly Bad Girls of the Bible, so you can check that out in there's like a really bad girls in the Bible, I think. I'm sure Jezebel's in that one. So these, as we said, these aspects we can recognize in our own personality, regardless of how we're gendered. And I think to me that's the value of these Bible stories, is that we can take a look in a way that maybe is not so challenging to really identify these tendencies and characteristics in ourselves so that we can deal with them. So I'd like to take that thought into meditative time just a minute. So if I could ask you to become still and comfortable where you are. And let's just become open and receptive to the inflow of spiritual energy and find that place in our heart where there is that reservoir of divine love and compassion. And just open the gates to that reservoir and allow that loving, healing energy to flow out, permeate our bodies and our environments and our world. And as we do that, we pay attention to and acknowledge these characteristics in our psyche that may be slightly bad from a judgmental standpoint, but we find if we ignore these things, they simply fester and become worse. And so rather than ignore these tendencies, we acknowledge them and invite them into the light of that loving, Mary energy, that perfect, divine, selfless, feminine love that we heard so beautifully exemplified in this dialogue. And so we just allow that loving energy to flow over and befriend and embrace these shadow personalities that we have in ourselves, but they do not define or control or impel ourselves. And so we just join hands with these subpersonalities, bring them into the light, and recognize our oneness in spirit with all these personal aspects that play out in this drama that is life. And so we just take these thoughts for a moment into that silence that Elijah recognized on Mount Carmel, where we're open and receptive to that still small voice. Thank you, Spirit. Amen.
Let's